For 23 long years, Margaret Thompson has devoted herself entirely to the care of her husband, Robert. At 68 years old, she's the embodiment of dedication. Every day, without fail, she's by his side, tending to his every need. Robert, paralyzed from a tragic car accident, has been lying in the same spot in their living room, his eyes never leaving the ceiling. At least that's what Margaret thought. But lately, something's been off. Little things. The faintest sound. A sigh, maybe? Coming from the room when she's not looking. Or that glass of water by Robert's bed. She's certain it was full when she left, but now it's half empty. It's these tiny inconsistencies that are slowly gnawing away at Margaret's peace. Could it be that her world, her devoted routine, isn't exactly what it seems? One afternoon, over tea with her best friend, Susan, Margaret's growing suspicions spill out. She hesitates but then shares her doubts, wondering aloud if maybe it's time to think about other options. Like a nursing home. "Maggie, you deserve more," Susan urges. "You can't keep doing this forever." Margaret's heart tugs at her devotion, but as Susan speaks, something inside her shifts. Maybe it's time to finally face the truth. Whatever that truth might be. And so, with the weight of 23 years of care and love on her shoulders, Margaret makes a decision that will change everything. She will install a hidden camera. "I need to know," she whispers to herself. The truth, no matter how painful, must come to light. Her world, once built on certainty, is now on the verge of unraveling. What will the camera reveal? And will Margaret be ready for the shocking discovery that awaits her? The day Margaret has been waiting for finally arrives. Her hands tremble as she opens the footage on her tablet, her heart pounding with anticipation. She watches, waiting for something, anything, that might explain the strange occurrences she's noticed. But nothing could have prepared her for what she's about to see. There it is, captured on the small hidden camera. Robert, lying motionless in bed, just like she's seen him for years. But then, in the dead of night, something changes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Robert begins to move. First his head, then his shoulders, until Margaret watches in utter disbelief. He sits up. He stretches his arms wide, like a man waking up from a long nap. The world as Margaret knows it comes crashing down. Her husband, the man she has devoted her entire life to, has been faking his paralysis for over 2 decades. The realization hits her like a tidal wave. She drops the tablet, her eyes wide with shock. The tears well up, but the anger is right behind them. How could he? Her mind races. She can't breathe. She can't think. The woman who had sacrificed everything, her career, her dreams, her future, is now faced with a truth she never imagined. In a daze, Margaret calls Susan, her best friend, to come over. When Susan arrives, the shock and devastation in Margaret's eyes say everything. "Maggie, what happened? What's wrong?" Margaret doesn't even need to say it. The camera footage is all the proof Susan needs. "What now?" Susan asks gently, her concern radiating. "I have to confront him," Margaret says, her voice trembling but determined. "I need to hear it from his own lips. I need to know why." After everything, with the weight of 23 years of love, betrayal, and sacrifice, Margaret walks to the living room. Robert is sitting there, pretending to be just as helpless as before. Her breath catches in her throat as she opens the door. "Robert," she says, her voice barely a whisper, but her heart screaming. "Why?" Robert doesn't meet her eyes. Slowly, he lowers his head, and when he finally speaks, his voice is hoarse, as though it hasn't been used in years. "Maggie, I can explain," he stammers. And then, the truth pours out. For the first time in over 2 decades, Robert admits the unspeakable. He faked his paralysis. Not because of the accident. No, he wasn't paralyzed. It was a decision born from selfishness, fear, and a desire to control. "I couldn't have children, Maggie. Not then. And I thought if I pretended, if I stayed like this, you would forget about it." The weight of his words hits Margaret like a brick. He didn't just lie to her. He took away her dreams, her chance at motherhood, her very future. She stares at him, at the man she once loved with all her heart. The anger rises within her. 23 years, Robert. 23 years of my life, our life, gone. Wasted. For a lie. The silence that fills the room is deafening. Robert's tears fall as he tries to explain, but nothing can undo what has been done. Margaret stands there, shaking with a mix of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. But there is something else too. Something she hadn't expected. A sense of relief. At least now, the truth is out. In the aftermath of the confrontation with Robert, Margaret stands at a crossroads. Her heart is heavy with betrayal, and the years of emotional turmoil weigh on her like an anchor. Yet, beneath it all, something begins to stir. A feeling she hasn't had in years. Freedom. The days following the confrontation are filled with a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Margaret begins to process everything. Her sacrifice, her loss, the years stolen by Robert's deceit. And for the first time, she feels a glimmer of something else. Hope. It's a faint whisper, but it's there. One day, while sitting alone in the quiet of her living room, Margaret remembers something she had pushed aside for so long, her love for art. Painting. She had always wanted to try, but there was never time. Her life had been consumed with Robert's needs. But now, with a new chapter beginning, she feels the pull to rediscover who she is. Without hesitation, Margaret picks up the phone and calls the local community center. The words spill out, almost too quickly, "I'd like to sign up for your painting class." The receptionist on the other end responds with warmth, "We'd be happy to have you." A small, but powerful decision. Margaret smiles to herself. The idea of creating something, of expressing her emotions through art, feels like a breath of fresh air. Something she's been starved for. The first day of her painting class arrives, and Margaret steps into the studio, feeling out of place among the younger students. Her hands tremble slightly as she picks up the brush, unsure of herself, unsure of what she's even capable of. But as the instructor, a kind woman named CLA, gently guides her, something begins to shift. "Don't worry about perfection," CLA says, her voice soft but reassuring. "Just let the brush flow, Margaret. Let your emotions guide you." And so, Margaret begins. Slowly at first, unsure of the brushstrokes, unsure of herself. But then, as the colors mix on the canvas, something amazing happens. Margaret loses herself in the process. The rage, the pain, the sadness of the years, all of it is poured onto the canvas. Each stroke is a release. With every color, she feels herself letting go of the past. She's no longer defined by her role as a caregiver. She's Margaret again. She's free. When the class ends, Margaret steps back and looks at what she's created. A painting full of swirling blues and dark grays, with a small, hopeful speck of golden light in the center. It's a reflection of her inner turmoil, but also a sign of the healing she is beginning to feel. At home, she places the painting on the living room wall, right where a photograph of her and Robert used to be. Robert notices it the moment he walks in. "Did you paint this?" he asks, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Margaret nods, a mix of pride and hesitation. "I started taking a class," she admits. "It's something I've always wanted to do." For the first time in years, Margaret is doing something for herself. And it feels incredible. But it's not just about the painting. Margaret begins reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding the relationships she had neglected for so long. She laughs again. She feels joy again. Her world is expanding beyond the walls of the house she once felt trapped in. Susan is right by her side through it all, encouraging her to embrace this new phase of life. "You're not just a caregiver, Maggie," she says. "You're a person, too. A beautiful, talented person. And it's time you remember that." Margaret begins to thrive in ways she never thought possible. She's not just painting, she's rediscovering herself, finding new friendships, and opening up to new possibilities. The woman who once gave everything to Robert is now learning to give something to herself. For the first time in years, Margaret's future is hers to create. Margaret's paintings, once a personal outlet for her grief and healing, are beginning to take on a life of their own. Word spreads about the woman who rediscovered herself through art, and soon her work gains recognition in the local community. She is invited to exhibit her paintings, a huge milestone in her journey. But Margaret is still hesitant. The woman who had spent so many years living in the shadows of her husband's needs, the woman who had hidden her true self for decades, is now being asked to step into the light. The thought is overwhelming, but it's also thrilling. She's nervous, but she knows this is something she has to do for herself. With Robert's hesitant support, Margaret prepares for her first art exhibition. She spends days making sure every piece is just right. Each painting tells a part of her story, from the heartbreak of betrayal to the joy of self-discovery. But as she arranges her works in the gallery, she notices a change in herself. The woman who once felt invisible, who thought her life was defined by caregiving, is now someone who can stand tall and say, "I did this. This is my story. And it matters." The night of the exhibition arrives, and the small community gallery is packed. Friends, family, and strangers alike wander through the space, marveling at the vivid colors and raw emotion of Margaret's work. As Margaret walks among the crowd, her heart swells with pride. She sees the admiration in their eyes, the appreciation for what she's created. But it's Robert's response that catches her by surprise. He's standing in front of one of her earliest paintings, the one with dark blues and swirling colors, a piece that holds so much of her pain. His eyes are fixed on it, his expression solemn. "It's beautiful," he says softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "Is it us?" Margaret stands beside him, her breath catching in her throat. "It was," she replies, "but it's not who we are anymore." Tears glisten in Robert's eyes as he looks at her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Margaret realizes, in that moment, that this is part of the healing process, not just for her, but for both of them. This exhibition, this public unveiling of her art and her soul, is a powerful step toward moving forward. And as the evening winds down, something even more surprising happens. Margaret is approached by a journalist who has been following her story. The reporter asks about the possibility of a documentary, an opportunity to share Margaret's journey of healing and rediscovery with the world. It's a huge offer, an invitation to expose her most private, painful moments to an audience far beyond the gallery walls. The idea is terrifying. Margaret is torn. On one hand, she feels the pull to help others who have been caregivers, to show them that it's never too late to find themselves again. On the other, she's afraid of the exposure, of reopening old wounds, of inviting the world into her most vulnerable space. As the invitation lingers in her mind, Margaret finds herself standing in the quiet of her home, staring at the walls that once held only memories of sacrifice. Robert, now more aware than ever of her journey, notices her hesitation. "You don't have to do this," he says, his voice softer than it has been in years. "But if you want to, I'll support you. You've come this far, Maggie. You deserve to share your story." Margaret looks at him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. Can she really open up like this? Can she expose herself again, after all that has happened? But somehow, Robert's words bring her a sense of peace. Perhaps this is another step in her journey, this documentary, this public sharing of her truth. It's her story now, and no one else can define it. After days of deep reflection, Margaret makes the decision that will define her future. She agrees to participate in the documentary, knowing that sharing her painful yet inspiring story could help others who have experienced the same struggles. This is no longer just about her. This is about showing the world that it's possible to heal, to rediscover yourself, and to find strength in the most unexpected places. As the cameras begin to roll, Margaret finds herself reliving the past. The wounds are still fresh, but there's something different now. She's no longer trapped by the pain. She is telling her story on her own terms, and the weight of it is no longer crushing her. Robert, surprisingly, offers his full support. For the first time in years, he stands beside her not as a burden to her care, but as a partner, albeit imperfect. They both know they can never erase the past, but they've chosen to face it together with honesty and openness. The day of the documentary filming is both intense and liberating. As Margaret speaks into the camera, she recounts her journey, from the heartbreak of discovering Robert's deceit, to her eventual awakening as an artist, and finally, to her newfound purpose. The truth flows freely, unburdened by fear or shame. Every word she speaks resonates with the power of resilience, and the world will hear her story, raw and real. The art exhibit, timed perfectly with the documentary's release, showcases her work in all its glory. Each painting tells a chapter of Margaret's emotional journey. The swirls of dark blues reflect the years of confusion and pain, while bursts of bright colors capture the newfound hope and joy she's discovered in herself. The exhibit is a resounding success, and the audience's response is overwhelming. They see not just a woman who has suffered, but one who has triumphed. They see a woman who found her voice and used it to reclaim her life. Throughout the exhibition, Robert remains in the background, a quiet presence, supporting his wife from a distance. He watches her, proud of the woman she has become. But their relationship, although better than it has been in years, is still a work in progress. There are no simple resolutions, no easy answers, but Margaret's transformation is undeniable. She stands tall now, not defined by her past, but by the courage to move forward. She has found something she never thought she would: freedom. Freedom to live for herself, to chase her own dreams, and to no longer be consumed by the past. In the final scene of the documentary, we see Margaret and Robert together once again, this time in the soft glow of a quiet evening. They are standing side by side, having faced their deepest wounds and come out the other side. They are not the same couple they once were, but they've found a way to coexist, to share a future that isn't dictated by lies, but by the truth they've both come to terms with. "Who are we now?" Margaret asks quietly, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. "We're still writing our story," Robert replies, his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. Margaret nods, feeling a sense of peace settle within her. The pain isn't gone, but she no longer carries it alone. She's not the woman she was when she started this journey. She's someone new, someone who has found her voice, her art, and most importantly, her strength. The screen fades to black as the credits roll, and we're left with a lingering sense of hope. Margaret's story doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing tales. Your support keeps us going,